Good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. Some of our Poe patrons have been asking me what my opinion might be on the new Netflix series Wednesday, because it has a lot of Poe references. But unfortunately, the series has already been out for a couple of months, so it seems like our review won't be very timely. But then I remembered, we spend all day talking about a guy who's been dead for 174 years. So in light of that, 2 months really isn't that long. And since everybody else has already done a review of Wednesday, how about we just count down some of the Poe references and Easter eggs we've picked out on the show? And that'll be the subject of tonight's installment of the Curator's Crypt. Well, the first and most obvious reference I picked out was the name of the school, Nevermore Academy. Of course, that's from Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven, quoth the raven, nevermore. So that's a pretty obvious one. Also, once you get into the academy, there's a statue of Poe with a raven on it. So that'll be our number 2. It's actually kind of a nice statue. I hope they can send it to us for the museum when they're done with it. Although I hear the show's been renewed for another season, so that's probably going to take a little while. Number 3 is that Edgar Allan Poe is mentioned as being a famous alumnus of the Nevermore Academy. But although Poe did attend schools in London, Richmond, and Charlottesville, he never actually visited Vermont, the setting of the fictional Nevermore Academy. Number 4, remember those games in which the students competed against each other? They were called the Poe games. And you'll notice that the teams had different Poe-themed names, like the Gold Bugs, or Pluto's favorite, the Black Cats, which turned out to be the winning team. So it doesn't just stop there. Wednesday itself is a spin-off from the Addams Family, which began as a comic by Charles Addams in the 1930s. And Addams was a big Poe fan. How do we know? He put it into his comics. And we just so happen to have a collection of Charles Addams' favorite haunts. You didn't think we were going to get a Poe artifact into this video, did you? And there's a couple Poe comics right in here. Quoth the Raven, occasionally. Now, if that weren't enough, the 1960s Addams Family TV series starred as Gomez Addams, John Astin, who later in life started giving performances as Poe. This is an autographed picture of John Astin portraying Edgar Allan Poe. And to top that off, Astin, for a while, was a member of the Poe Museum's board here in Richmond. So there's all sorts of Poe connections there. Then, let's get back to the show Wednesday. The director and producer was Tim Burton. And Tim Burton, by his own admission, grew up loving Poe. Here's what he had to say about it. Even as a kid living in the valley, I was not in sync with my surroundings. I did have an Edgar Allan Poe problem, though. Because when I was a child, I had a bedroom with 2 normal windows. For some reason, my parents walled up my room, so I had to stand on top of the desk to look out. What's that Edgar Allan Poe story where the husband walls up his wife? I started to have these connections to those kinds of things. It's probably little incidents like those that shaped my life and made me start thinking about strange things. So it seems inevitable that Tim Burton would make a Poe-inspired movie. This is a guy who grew up watching those Roger Corman-directed, Vincent Price starring Edgar Allan Poe adaptations. And you guessed it, we've got lots of Corman, Price movie memorabilia right here at the Poe Museum. But in 1982, Tim Burton made a short film called Vincent about a boy who's obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe. And since Burton grew up obsessed with Poe and Vincent Price, he got Vincent Price to narrate it. And then later, Burton made a film called Edward Scissorhands about a scientist who creates a boy and for some reason gives him scissors for hands. And that scientist is played by Vincent Price in his last movie role. And there's also some other guy in there that's kind of famous now too. It's Johnny Depp. And supposedly Depp and Price used to read Poe's poetry to each other on set. So it's about time that Tim Burton just gets it over with and makes an Edgar Allan Poe movie. He's already done a Washington Irving with Sleepy Hollow. Just imagine what he could do with The Mask of the Red Death or The Fall of the House of Usher. But in lieu of that, at least he's given us Wednesday with plenty of Poe references. And now that he's got another season, he's got a chance to give us even more and really share his love of Poe with the public. And maybe eventually give us that big Poe statue for the museum here. Until then, Pluto and I will have to give the first season of Wednesday 4.5 Poes. Why not 5? Not enough Poe references. If we add some more in the next season, we'll see what we can do. So thanks to the Poe patron who sent in this topic for discussion. And if you have other ideas of topics you'd like us to cover in the Curator's Crypt, why don't you just put them down in the comments. And if you would have liked to see videos like this a week before everybody else, why not become a Poe patron yourself at patreon.com/Poe Museum. And until next time, thanks for joining us, and I'll leave you with more gratuitous footage of the Poe Museum cats doing cat stuff.